Hi, everyone. Welcome to Noodling with Neurodiversity Coaching Academy. I'm Tracy Winter, one of the co-founders of Neurodiversity Coaching Academy. I'm here with my other co-founder, Kate Arms. Say hi, Kate.
Hello.
And we are here today with Lisa Kerr, who is a coach out of the UK and interested in neurodiversity. So Lisa, why don't you say a few words about yourself?
Hi, thanks, Tracy. So yeah, I'm Lisa Kerr. I'm a certified ADHD life coach and business consultant, and I am ADHD and autistic myself. So big interest in the field of neurodiversity.
Thank you, Lisa. And so what are we talking about today, Lisa?
So I would just love to know what led you and Kate to set up the Neurodiversity Coaching Academy.
I think the biggest thing was we saw an unmet need, right? Isn't that how the best things get created, is because we're filling a gap that's out there? So I was already an ADHD coach trainer for one of the ADHD coaches training academies. And I thought, but there's so many other kinds of neurodiversity, some of which are the people that I'm dealing with in my coaching practice. And there isn't really anything out there for coaches to learn how to deal with or how to be neurodiversity inclusive, as opposed to just targeting one neurotype or another. So I thought this is something that was really, we needed a school for this. And I happened to mention it to Kate one day, and about, 8 months later, she brought it back up and said, hey, I've been thinking about this thing, and how about if we do this? And I was like, yes, let's do that. That's my understanding of how this came to be. Kate, what's your story about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar in that the unmet need was there. I was coming from a very different place in that I was working with a lot of clients in coaching who, if you look at them through a diagnostic lens, you might argue that they were diagnosable, but they didn't have diagnoses, and they were only arguably diagnosably sort of in the medical model. And they were struggling with the same kinds of issues that I was seeing in my kids who have diagnoses, ADHD, autism, and the strange manifestations that show up when giftedness is also in the place. And I was deeply involved in conversations about giftedness as a form of neurodiversity that wasn't really being included in neurodiversity. And I have real interest in gender nonconformity and sort of some of the weirder things, aphantasia and that sort of thing. So there was this very broad brush of things that I was working with. And I had several clients early on in my career and an experience myself in coach training programs where a lack of neurodiversity inclusiveness in the approach to training was really doing harm and was triggering people in some pretty bad ways. And so I was coming from that place. And so when Tracy said she wanted to do this, I was like, I'm not really sure I want to join a school. And also I'm doing something that I'm not hearing anybody talk about. And I'm kind of tired of sort of trying to convince coaches one-on-one that they should expand the way they're thinking a little bit. So maybe we should actually get out there and make a sort of bolder statement.
And let me say one thing real quick from what Kate said. Kate mentioned sort of the weirder things. So we mentioned this in the first session that we ever did, actually. When we say weird, we mean it as in like things that are not typical, things do not occur very often. We don't mean it with a judgmental or any kind of like, moral value statement attached to it. It's just things that are not things that most people experience.
Yeah. Most of my coaching career is with people who are outliers on multiple scales at once.
Yes.
And so they tend to be the people who are outliers every time you do it, every time you do a study. My clients are the ones who are disregarded as extraneous stray data points.
That's been my experience too. Both of us have an entree into neurodiversity kind of through giftedness. That's how we connected, was in the gifted community, because that's my area of study, my graduate school. So
could you just say a little bit more about that, Tracy? Because I think giftedness is a term that many people either haven't heard of or don't really understand what that means.
Yeah, I will start and then Kate will fill in some gaps and then we'll go back and forth most likely because it is not a simple definition. There isn't actually an agreed upon definition of giftedness in the field. So that makes, let me tell you, like, that makes research really fun when you can't even define the term to start with. The definition I use, and I'm gonna mess up the words, is the one that most people who have a sort of a psychological bent in the gifted field use, which is that giftedness is asynchronous development. It creates intensities that develop into a qualitatively different experience of being in the world. So what that means is we have different ways that we develop. We have, cognitive development, emotional, moral, interpersonal, depending on who you ask, it's a lot of lines. And they develop at very different rates, not just a little bit different like most people do, but like enormously different rates. And with that comes a more sensitive nervous system that picks up on more things that are going on in the world, more things that are going on in our minds, and really a deepness of experience such that when you put all of that together, people who are gifted aren't necessarily taking in the same data from the world that most people are. So that's what that actually looks like. Like one of the standards is more than 2 standard deviations away from the norms. That's about 128 on most IQ tests. But giftedness isn't just about IQ. It's about emotional depth. It's about imaginational ability. It's about curiosity. It can be about, special interests. So like I said, it's not, I can't give you a one-line definition, even though I kind of did, but it's this whole concept of it. And most people don't know that about giftedness. You hear giftedness and you hear like, oh, they're super smart. And maybe a little stuck up, let's be honest. Right. And that is not what I like. That is not my experience of most gifted people at all either. And because they have this different experience of being in the world, they are part of the, first of all, they're part of the neurodiversity sort of umbrella because research has found that gifted people have a different constructed brain and a differently wired brain. So different things light up versus most people. And that's part of the definition of neurodiversity. And this different experience of being in the world means that when they don't have someone who understands their kind of neurodiversity or their kind of neurodivergence, that's when, like Kate was saying, sometimes harm can be done because you're not getting the reflections that match who you are. And that's just really confusing and certainly not conducive to growth, which is what we're supposed to be doing in coaching. That was a lot. Kate, make it sound.
Yeah, I mean, I think the couple of things that I would sort of throw in there as well is giftedness is not a psychological term. It's a term that gets used in educational settings for distinguishing curriculum approaches. And it is either used for this sort of complexity and people who need complexity to be interested in things, or it's used for people who are expected to excel in some area. And the people who focus on complexity and excelling are sort of a narrower focus, and that is sort of the primary overlap piece. So that's sort of generally accepted. It's the people who are like, but that level of complexity has challenges, and that when that level of complexity has enough challenges, they start to look like autism and ADHD, and they might actually be diagnosably autism and ADHD. So there's a lot of interest right now about sort of how is the underlying neuroscience showing similarities in these wirings. Whereas in many cases, if you're not quite so complex and you're a little closer to sort of how the average brain processes the world, it might actually be easier to be innovative because it's easier to actually sort of make a little step forward rather than do something that's sort of wildly off the charts. So it's this weird space. The things that I think of as really valuable from a coaching perspective are able to deal with a lot of data cognitively at once, not necessarily logically, often in a sort of intuitive, I look at the world, I see it, I can read it, I can tell you what's going to happen. I read the patterns, I cannot break down and do my work for you and explain you why I know.
Yeah, so my work is not a thing. And so let me throw in one other term as long as we're in this, which is a lot, most of probably my clients and Kate's clients are what we call twice exceptional. So gifted and some other kind of neurodivergence, right? So gifted and ADHD, gifted and autistic, gifted and both of those, and dyslexic, like neurodivergences seem to me to travel in packs. So I find it rare that I am dealing with someone who actually just has one, even if maybe they only know about one. So throw in twice exceptional too, as long as we're hanging out here.
While we're at it.
Yeah.
Thank you. I love that definition, and interested in a couple of things each of you said there. So Kate, you said about the propensity to cause harm if people are coaching without that understanding, and Tracy, picking up on something you said about needing that understanding to be able to give the reflections to the client. And I've attended all of your sessions because they're super fascinating, but attended one about the funhouse and flat mirror and the reflections, and I found that really fascinating. I'd love to hear you talk a bit more about what that really means, that reflecting to clients.
You want me to go first? You want to take this one first?
Why don't I just sort of start and then you can take off with the mirror piece, because I think that part of the context of this is in this do no harm space. Because as coaches, we have to create a space where our clients feel comfortable looking at the places where they're stuck, and looking at the places where they're stuck without shame, with curiosity and willingness to sort of go into those hard places. And the harm that can happen is when, if you don't understand somebody, if you don't sort of know them well enough to mirror them, you can actually misread what's hard in a very profound way. And if you misread what's hard, you might make a suggestion that actually is like enormously difficult when you think it's easy, or vice versa. And that can land really awkwardly with a client. And if it comes with any edge of judgment that this thing should be easy or should be hard, the kinds of clients that we're talking about are very, very sensitive to that slightest tone of judgment by the time they come to us, because they've lived with a lifetime of reading the signals about whether people think they're okay or not. That's very harmful if that judgment sort of sneaks in, that you're reinforcing this thing that is hard for you should be easy, or this thing that should be easy for you, or vice versa. And so the mirroring piece that Tracy brings to this work is so powerful. So I'll let you talk about that, Tracy.
And as an example for that, like this is the typical example in ADHD coaching anyway, and it can be more or less harmful. It's sort of flip one is, when the coach says, well, just get a planner and stick to it. And every ADHDer in the world goes, are you kidding me? If that was possible, I wouldn't be here. Like, what are you talking about? But that's that whole, like, that's easy for some people, and it's really hard for people with slightly different brains. The mirroring piece actually comes from my dissertation work. This was my sort of theme. And it's about how we form our self-concept based on the reflections that we get from other people. So we always get told, hey, be yourself. Just be yourself. It's great. Well, multiple things. Number one, that's not how it works sociologically. That's just not what happens. That's not how you form who you are. You form it based on some inner stuff, probably, although that's pretty fuzzy in the literature, and based on the reflections that you get from other people and how much you incorporate those or not, right? We are a collection of our experiences. We know that. And so there's that piece, and there's the piece I was just going to say that I forgot, but it'll come back. So those reflections are, well, that was it, that it's not always safe to be ourselves. For some of us who, when we've tried, have gotten these reflections of, you are not doing it right. You are not being it right. Like, what is this thing that is you? And the way that I conceptualize that is, it can be less extreme than that as well. It's a range. So when you're getting a reflection that aligns with who you believe yourself to be, who you understand yourself as, it's like someone is holding a flat mirror up and you're seeing, like that's matching. And that is, for people who don't get that very often, which is a lot of our folks, is like this, is one of my participants said, it's sort of like the clouds open and the beam of sunlight shines through on you and you're just like warm and basking in it because we don't get it very often. So it's that big a deal with like the heavens open. The flip side of that is what you mentioned, Lisa, about funhouse mirrors, because most people, not knowing any better, will be holding up mirrors that to you perceive as like, am I really that tall? Am I really that wide? Am I really squiggly? Like, that's not how I understand myself. And it's the cognitive dissonance that can cause, right? In who am I? Who do I want to be? Or who is it okay to be? Right. And those things start very, very young before we even know it. So that's some of the stuff that our clients are often bringing. And that's why I think one of my responsibilities, opportunities, honors as a coach is to be able to hold up the flattest mirror I can for someone and say, this is, you know, like, was this aligned with who you are? And being open to changing that mirror if not need be. And then just a little bit more, like maybe an enhanced mirror that says, and this is what I see that you could be. What do you think about that? So one of the images in my dissertation presentation was like an ugly duckling, actually just a duckling. And in the mirror was a swan, a full-grown swan. So like, it's that concept of if you are a duck, being judged as a duck, you go, oh, good, I'm a duck. If you are a swan, you are a baby swan of sickness, and you're being judged as a duck, you're going to be found wanting. If you get judged as a swan, which is what you actually are, then you know you are this majestic bird that just glides and is a symbol of grace. So I talked a lot again, sorry. Yes. What do you think about all that?
I love that, and it really resonates in that, you know, Tracy, you're my coach, as we know, but in terms of thinking of why people choose the coach that they want to work with, I think that's kind of really relevant for me of that thing of knowing that I am in that twice exceptional category. And as Kate said, you're so right about feeling judgment so often and working with people who can hold up that flat mirror. And whilst I hadn't necessarily thought of it in those terms, that's absolutely kind of what appealed to me of why I chose you as my coach rather than anyone else, but also why I come to the Neurodiversity Coaching Academy sessions is understanding those things and those conversations. And I just find all of it really fascinating and learning so much, but so much about why you take that approach that you do.
Can I ask you a question?
You can.
If you started out asking us like why are we doing this? Why do we open the Neurodiversity Coaching Academy? And some of it was the distinction between some of the things that already exist. And you're a trained ADHD coach. So you have that understanding. What brings you to the Neurodiversity Coaching Academy classes and to other work? And keeps you coming back, I guess, more importantly. That an interesting thing.
Yeah, so a couple of things. First one, and the reason I first came to them from your very first class was just I find you and Kate super interesting. So I love listening to you. Tracy, you were my mental coach on my training, so learning so much from you. And also those extra aspects to it. So as you say, I'm a trained ADHD coach and I continue to grow as a coach. And I'm a newly trained ADHD coach, so I'm still learning so much every day and working towards ICF accreditations and wanting to be the best coach I can be for everyone, because I do executive coaching as well as ADHD coaching. And I think, as Kate said, it's that line between people who are diagnosed and people who might be neurodivergent but aren't diagnosed, or people who don't have enough of those challenges to get a diagnosis but still need that different approach. And as someone who's ADHD and autistic myself, I recognize that brings such a different aspect to the coaching, and it makes me reflect so much on my own coaching. And very many of my clients seek me out because they see that I'm autistic and ADHD, and they specifically want someone who understands that there's a nuance and that co-occurrence brings different challenges and different strengths. And so there are aspects of the coaching that I learn all the time, but that's really fascinating to me, of how I adapt my coaching style to suit someone who has 2 conditions or 3 conditions, and thinking about how I also bring that into people who don't necessarily have any diagnoses, but who just think differently. So I think that the way you approach it and each of the sessions is just thinking about different aspects of neurodivergence from an overall coach approach, rather than being specific to one thing or another. And that really helps me picture how I will kind of grow my own coaching and grow my own skills around it, as well as leaving me after every session with just so many more questions and things that I then go away and go into a hyper focus and go and think, I'm going to have to carry on looking that up.
Thank you for answering that. Back to the things you're curious about and you want to ask us about. But like that actually hadn't occurred to me before. So thank you for indulging me there.
No, you're welcome.
One of the things I sort of want to throw in there, because I think it's really interesting, because one of the things, I don't come at this work from a neurotype piece. Like, what I know about neurotypes, I know as a parent. And what I learned as a somatically informed coach. So my coach training started with using applied improvisational dance as a coaching modality, and then added sort of text-based creativity coaching, and then added ICF competencies to it. So that's my trajectory. But it's all been from the coaching perspective. And then I had kids who got diagnoses because of the trouble that they had at school. And so I learned about the neurotypes in a very different world than I learned about the coaching. And the combination of coaching skills, somatic understanding, and leadership training skills in a sort of presence-based, agile kind of leadership piece, putting all of those together helped my kids so much that I started doing it with my clients. And so for me, this is all putting this together. So this piece about, like, how do I work with the people with the diagnosis and my executives and my people, what I've discovered is that if I get nuanced enough about the skills, they work for everybody. And so, like, I love that that's where you're sort of getting stuff, because it makes me feel like we're on the right track.
I feel like you can possibly add psychic to that as well, because my next question was going to be, do you adapt your style for neurotypical and neurodivergent clients based on your kind of understanding of them? So I think you just answered that.
The short answer is no.
Approach.
Like, I get really present with them and try and be really in relationship with the person who's in front of me, and curious about how they're different from how I am. And just trust it. Like, I think that's my primary assumption in this work is, I don't know how your brain works. All I can do is ask you questions that help you understand how your brain works, and then help you find that creativity and positivity to actually look at, okay, here's how my brain works. Here's how my body works. Here's the situation I'm in. This is what I'm willing to try. Because I actually don't know. Like, I know I'm so book learned, but I don't actually know anything about your situation that is specifically useful. You have to tell me everything.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think, like, the short answer is no. And also, like, that's because I try to suspend all the assumptions that I might come in with, and take this person as a whole new, well, they are a whole new being, right, that I've never encountered. And so it's really starting from absolutely blank page. When I'm working with a new person, is they're a blank page, and they fill it in for me, right, through some of the questions that I ask, through some of the things that they just say. And that's part of what makes neurodiversity inclusive coaching, I think, so fun. is like, you just get to be curious all the time and surprised, because especially the folks we work with, you can't predict what's going to happen. If you do, you're mostly wrong. So like, when you do it, that Keith's talking about, the way that we're discussing and the way we talk about in class, it's so fun. It's so fun because these people, when you really like people in general, and especially our clients, like when we get into those inner workings, right, and see the world through their eyes, it's just interesting and fun and fascinating and feeds my curiosity. And then I get to be surprised by things that they say. And like, if I think that I know what they're going to say, which honestly used to be the case before I trained and upskilled and all the things, like, this is just so much more fun. It's just so much more fun than assuming assuming I know, excuse me.
I think you're pointing at what makes it so hard though, is because people come to us because they think we're smart and because they think that we can help them and they pay us to solve their problem. And to have them come at us with that energy and to then know that we can do that, but the way that we are going to do that is by being clueless and out of control in a way that is calm and loving and welcoming and playful. Like, it's hard to give up control and smart like that.
And like, so I was speaking with someone yesterday for the first time and like trying to explain, here's how this works to her. And, I finally said, look, you've known you for 62 years. I've known you for 24 minutes. Who's more likely to know what's best for you? Who's more likely to find your answers, right? Like, when you put it that way, it's sort of a ridiculous assumption that I would know what's best for you.
It's interesting because it comes up a lot though, doesn't it, of people coming to coaching, exactly as Kate says, looking for specific coaches who resonate, who've got the skills, who've got that understanding of what the client is bringing to coaching. And it's interesting to hear how you explain what coaching is and what coaching is not, in that you're coming to it from that sense of curiosity and from that experience. So I guess my question is, how do you balance that and explaining to people exactly why you have the knowledge and the skills, but that you specifically don't bring those into the conversation? Not sure I phrase that very well, but that underlying knowledge that you bring to it whilst not directly bringing it into a session.
Yeah.
So I would say that one of the things that's really fascinating is it's actually about a match between where the client is and where the coach is. And so the conversation actually has to sort of be a really negotiated conversation. If you think about sports coaching, so if you think about soccer, football, and you think about small children who are learning to kick the ball, their coach actually needs to teach them the rules of the game and actually needs to impart a whole lot of information. And then if they play and then they're teenagers playing, the coaches are organizing drills, helping them scouting out what the other teams are doing, figuring out what skills might be useful, and then teaching them how to captain themselves and to actually be on the field without being coached. And figuring out how to communicate while they're on the field. And then once they get to the elites, so much of it is like, how do you get your mind in the game? And okay, here we have this big elite championship game. How do you actually show up with your best self, not choke under pressure? And those are different matches. And I think that in life coaching and professional coaching, it's very, very similar. And so a lot of people, when they come to coaching after a diagnosis, they actually want somebody to give them information because they don't have information, and they actually want somebody to help them figure out what's valuable information, what's out of date, what is actually sort of sufficiently medicalized that it sort of brings this ounce of shame with it, and what is actually like, there's some functional medicine that would be useful here. And so they're actually looking for some wisdom. And I think that there's a place for coaches who come with a lot of education The coaching piece is when it goes, okay, so here's some useful information. What are you going to do with it? What do you want to do with it? How do you want to own it? How do you want to make it yours? Because we don't know how to apply it. I don't work in that space very often. I'm much more likely, but I do work in that space as an agile coach. When I go into organizations as an agile coach, I'm like, I got some knowledge, I got some metrics, I've got some understanding about things, and I can bring you some tools, but I'm not going to bring them to you until I'm sure they're actually going to be useful. So I'm going to start from that. Where are you? What do you want? What will be useful? But if I have expertise and you've gone as far as you can go and my expertise is the next step, then it's my responsibility to actually show up with it. And I think this is a really interesting dance that we do, because people come to us with different levels of knowledge, different levels of self-understanding, and different levels of willingness to go and do the research, and different levels of wanting to be told. Tracy?
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything Kate says, as usual. We disagree, but like by the time we get here, we don't disagree. I think two thoughts come to mind as you ask the question, Lisa. We do have a lot of expertise. We have knowledge, right? That is part of what we bring. And I sometimes will grip a bit here or there. What I do is if I feel like I'm withholding something from my client, then they'll share it. But like Kate said, I'm immediately going to, what's that spark for you? But more of it is, and Kate and I are both dancers, so like this is my metaphor, but like kind of like what you were saying, Kate, about the kids learning to hit the ball, right? When you are learning the steps to a new routine or a new piece, you're concentrating. You're trying to figure out what comes next. You're concentrating on your technique, which you've also been working on for a long time, right? And some of that becomes muscle memory. And then the dance becomes eventually muscle memory. So that by the time I'm performing, if I'm thinking about my steps, if I'm thinking about my technique, if I'm thinking about what comes next, I'm having a crappy performance. Like, no, I need to be in the performance. But all of that is coming with me. It's just not in my consciousness as I'm doing. So for me, that's like my coaching. I have all these developmental models. I have years of study. I have years of experience. I have years of research and discussing with other coaches and like continuing development and all of that. And it all is there, but it's back here. So it is also present in my coaching, but it's informing the questions that I ask. It's not me going, so let me tell you about this, right? But my questions are all coming through those lenses. So it's kind of like muscle, those pieces end up like muscle memory. And that's how they're part of my coaching. Just like my technique in dance is part of my performance, but it's not the part that is the conscious part at that point. Does that make sense? The way I describe it to my clients, because when I describe that, I ask a lot of questions and that brings to new awareness. And I work with a lot of bright people. We're used to asking questions. We're used to having asked all the questions. We're used to having asked ourselves all the questions, or so we think, right? Because we're smart. We got this down, and like questions are our jam. And what I tell them is, yeah, we think we've asked ourselves all the questions. Me too. Except when I work with my coach, it turns out, nope. But like for me, when I'm asking myself those questions, they end up going circular, right? And we start running around in the same circles. And then they get faster. And then they get faster and they get faster and they get faster. And they're like spinning. And then sparks start to shoot off of them, which seems vaguely dangerous, right? In my brain. And my job as your coach is to like put a door in the circle, open that door, let the sparks fly to different parts of your brain and make connections that maybe they hadn't before because they were stuck in this circle of questions that you have. And something about that seems to connect with the clients who end up working with me. So
I love the fact that the dancing in the moment is kind of a coaching term, and that we're all taught that. But it's just awesome that you two actually are dancers. Literally, you're the only ones who genuinely can dance in the moment by virtue of the background. But I wonder, is there anything that you think particularly led you to the coaching or to the working together because of the fact you both have that dancing background, which is quite unusual background for people who are then in the professional and executive coaching space? I don't meet many who say, oh, and I was a professional dancer.
What do you think, Tracy?
It's a great question. I haven't thought about it yet. So I love that kind of question. Thank you. Looking back, it feels to me like I sort of have tripped and fallen into most of the things that I have ended up doing, including coaching. And also I've been dancing since I was 3. So like the way I understand the world, I think has, like, whether I'm conscious or not, has this like patina of the dance world. So I do wonder if there's something like that that Kate and I connected around, even without knowing we're connecting around it. That brings it here. My consciousness won't give me something that's like, yeah, and here's how it connected. And I have this vague feeling, like as I'm embodied, like taking your question in, I have this vague feeling that you're right. Like there's something there. But I can't put words around it yet. But Kate might be able to, because she's.
So here's what came to me as I heard the question, Lisa, is so Tracy has spoken in a few settings about the fact that I am her coach. And so here we are.
Questions that open the door, because I'm like, oh my gosh, what just
so I think that actually sort of, and she was my client before we started working together. And so actually that relationship, I think, was really, it was like coaching her made me want to partner with her. And I think that the way that she engaged with the somatic and embodied and dance-based part of the coaching relationship was absolutely part of what I love about working with her. And I think that is very much in there. I also think that my embodiment is almost certainly part of what Tracy found really powerful about working with me. We met in intellectual spaces. We met in academic-minded scholars talking about giftedness, very, very rigorous intellectual stuff. And so I think actually, when I threw out into that group that I was open for more clients at a time when Tracy was a little stuck, I actually think that the intellectual sparks were sort of what was there first, maybe. And then I think that we discovered that the embodiment part really is just a delicious part of how we work together. So I do think it's there. And I think it's actually this combination of electric intellectual sparks and deep presence that we see in each other. That is why we like to work together so much.
I totally agree with everything she said about why I wanted to work with. Absolutely. And now I'm starting to bring that gently, cautiously into some of my coaching with some folks. Bring a little bit of that embodiment of that, like, pulling it into your body. Because it can be so powerful for me. And it can be so powerful for those of us who are very, very bright, who are walking around like brains on sticks, right? Which, even though I'm a dancer, I also walk around like a brain on a stick. I'm not sure how it's sort of like over here until Kate brings them together. So I find it really powerful.
And that leads really nicely into the next thing I was going to ask, was thinking about trauma and the trauma-informed aspect of coaching. And you mentioned there, Tracy, about kind of the going into the body. And I know Kate said something on the last session about coaches needing to be really aware of too much going into the body, because that can bring up trauma, particularly in neurodivergent folk who very often have a lot of trauma in the backgrounds. So what would you say about what Neurodiversity Coaching Academy brings, what the two of you bring to that aspect, and that doing no harm, but the need even more in the neurodiverse space to do no harm by being really aware of those boundaries?
My thoughts are in multiple places. Kate, are your thoughts in more cogent place to start?
I mean, my first place is that I really love that what we've been saying has landed, so that Lisa just fed it back to us exactly the way that we've been coming from.
Right. Great notice, yes.
Because I think you just nailed it right there. I think that it is not fitting in and feeling like we're different. And this is me, but this is also many of my clients, and this is sort of the definition of neurodivergent. There often comes this sense of I'm wrong or I'm broken. That is that judgment, that negative judgment, rather than just I'm different, which doesn't necessarily, I'm different can be neutral. It can be good, but I'm broken or I'm bad or I'm wrong or I'm not fitting in has this judgment piece about it. And navigating with our clients how they've coped with that in the past to getting to where they are now. Sometimes that's really, really tender work, because if the coping mechanisms that got you here are now getting in your way, it's terrifying to imagine letting go of those coping mechanisms until you can see that you have alternate skills that you're actually going to sort of shift from these coping mechanisms to these skills. And that can, but building these other skills and trying them requires being bad at them most of the time. So it's tender work.
I love the words you chose there, Kate. When I first kind of did a LinkedIn post about 18 months ago, telling everyone about my neurodivergence, the actual caption that I put on the photo was different, not broken.
Yeah. And that's if we can help people make that shift, then they get access to more of their creativity and more of their resourcefulness. It's part of why when I look at what's out there in sort of neurotype related coaching, and I see quite a lot of stuff that is like, we can help you cope with the differences that comes from a sort of performance management, will help you fit in better kind of place. Part of me is like, that's great. It's wonderful to teach people those skills is really useful. And also that underlying piece of like, we need to help you manage to fit rather than we need to help you design a life that works for you, and design a way of working that works for you. It's such an embedded, this is a problem mindset that it's all tender stuff.
One of my favorite things that Kate does is coaching is not therapy, but it can be therapeutic. And I think around the trauma stuff, that's especially true. Because sometimes just holding up that flat mirror is therapeutic. Like, oh, somebody sees how I am, and it is not telling me it's wrong. We also try not to tell them that it's right, because they're right to judgment, right? But we're just holding up the mirror. So in doing that, like even that can sort of like heal some of that ambiguity and uncertainty that has come, that has I've up into trauma. And I think what Kate says about like what I try to explain to people about what I do, people come to me for time management, people come to me for prioritization, executive function stuff, right? That's what they come for. And what my clients report having gotten, they don't talk about trauma, but they say, I'm friends with my brain now. Like, I get it. I can flow with who I am. Right? And to me, that's going from managing trauma, managing ADHD, managing autism, whatever, to being it, right? Being me, regardless of what we want to call it, but I'm being me, and I can be in the world in a way that is me, and also in a way that is safe for me. So that's, yeah, that's when I started having some people describe it like that, I was just like, oh, wow. Like, I'm not sure I even realized the work that was happening. But it's really an honor and a privilege to be able to work with people in this space, with trauma awareness, with deep presence, with, curiosity and surprise. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. Thank you so much, Lisa. We appreciate your curiosity, and we appreciate your questions, and we appreciate your learning. Like Kate said, it's really fun when you like put stuff out there and people are like, yeah, answer this. And I'm like, yes, that's right. Think anyway. So
Thank you.
so much.
It's been really fun.
Thank you.
And thank you, Kate, for
Yes, thank you, Tracy.
Yep. And we will see you all at our next time of noodling with the Neurodiversity Coaching Academy. If you haven't caught the earlier ones from this week, please do check out our YouTube channel. It's right there.